So many of our cities are adorned with public art. Do you ever wonder why? Is it just about decoration, or is there more to it? In other words, I'm asking, what good is public art? What do we have it for? Proponents of public art suggest that it provides a platform for public life, driving economic growth, social cohesion, local identity, and even public health. But for most people, it seems that public art simply fades into the background. And then for some, public art is utterly impenetrable, or even worse, a waste of money and space. So there seems to be a gap, one that's perhaps preventing us from realizing the value of public art. And my question is how we might bridge that gap. In particular, as computing becomes more and more central across everyday life, I wonder whether there's a technological path to more broadly realizing the value of public art. The research I'll be presenting here is responding to that question, considering the intersection of public art and socio-technical design. I invite you to begin exploring with me how digital technology might help people engage with public art in more meaningful ways, affecting personal and social change. This is exploratory design research, sitting at the fuzzy front end of the design process, as you can see here. This is the stage of discerning the design criteria before ideas are generated. Two research areas frame the study at hand: art engagement in HCI, and then socio-technical design for personal reflection. To speak first about HCI and art engagement, the work to date has mostly been in the museum context and mostly about information delivery, that is, giving information on the artist and location and so on. Overall, work in this area has explored the social aspects of art experiences and related short-term uses of technology. We haven't yet seen explorations on the role of technology in private art experiences and over the long term. Still, some of the findings suggest that this would be a fruitful path to explore, and you can of course find those references in the full paper. Next, to speak of design for reflection, this is an area that deals with how people can learn and be shaped through experiences with technology and information, for example through reflective journaling, but without making direct reference to art. Work in this area shows that designs for reflection should allow open and holistic ways for reflecting, integrating different technologies and helping people bring together different aspects of their life and their broader context. I see an opportunity to connect the work on reflection with that on art engagement, and I won't discuss it too much in this talk, but in the full research paper I also connect this to more philosophically oriented work on what's been called moral learning, or how people learn about what it means for them to live the best life they can. The idea here is that moral learning requires reflection, and reflection doesn't just happen automatically. We can build technologies to support it. Reflective journaling is one modality for moral learning, and it has been explored to some extent in HCI already. That's what I'll be using to explore in this research. So all of this leads to two research questions, which this project is responding to. The first is, how might people use journaling as part of their experience of public art? And the second is, what are the features of this design space? These are exploratory questions, and they were addressed with a design probe study. The design probe is a design-led, user-as-subject methodology for generating insights and inspiration about a design space. Broadly speaking, it's a type of diary study, which is a longitudinal, qualitative research approach in which participants self-report in a log or a journal. The quote-unquote diary, in the case of design probes, is comprised of small, crafted, intriguing objects that provoke participants to consider a question and then creatively respond by completing the object. In this study, the probe took the form of a small booklet, like you see here. This format was selected for its familiarity in the activity of journaling. Each page presents the participant with open-ended textual prompts. The probe was designed to be portable, that is, small enough to carry, but with enough room to write a few sentences for each question, and then also discreet, so there was nothing on the cover. Instructions appear on the first page, as you can see here, and the participant is assured that there's no right way or wrong way to do the project, and they were reminded that words or images or both may be used. On each of the following pages, there's 27 pages in all, there's space for a date and mural, as well as two questions. For example, the page that you see here asks, if you sit with the mural for a few minutes, what do you notice that you didn't see at first? And then the second question is, what ideas does this spark? Another page asks, how does its location affect how you experience it? And what story from your past does it remind you of? This study was set in Philadelphia, which is an ideal location for public art-related research for a number of reasons. First, Philadelphia is the home for the Association for Public Art, and it has a long history of public art. You might know Philadelphia as the city of brotherly love, but Philly is also known as the city of murals. It has an estimated 4,000 murals, to say nothing of the other public art that we have. In this study, there were 13 participants, 7 women and 6 men, who ranged in age from approximately 25 to approximately 55. At our initial briefing meeting, the participants were given the instructions and the probe, and they were basically told to take the probe for a month and use it however they wanted to. After 2 weeks, each participant was sent a link to an online survey. This survey asked them to recount their latest experience using the probe. It was open-ended and qualitative. After 4 weeks, each participant was contacted to arrange a follow-up interview. These lasted approximately 30 minutes. The interviewees shared how they used the probe, how participating changed the way that they experienced murals and other parts of their lives, and they also reflected on whether they would use something like this technology in the long term. As you can see, 9 participants completed the online survey, and then 6 completed the follow-up interview. Before diving into the main findings, I just wanted to share a few general observations. These shed some light on the first research question, which asked about how people might use journaling as part of their experience of public art. You may have noticed the attrition in the previous slide. 13 enrolled, but only 6 ultimately completed the project. This shows that this kind of activity isn't for everybody. It was a lot to ask, participants weren't paid, and it lasted a whole month, right? And I'm sure we can all relate that it's easy to forget about these kinds of tasks, or to mean well, but then set them aside. As far as the responses that I did get, they were mostly text. There were a few drawings. As you can see here, one participant even decorated the cover. The participants wrote about their memories, reflections, thinking about politics, about the content of the murals, the location of the murals. A lot of them talked about the need to slow down, which was interesting. The major findings that emerged from the study took the form of what I call tensions within the design space of engaging with public art. I think of these as features of the design space, and so they address the second research question. The first tension has to do with paper versus phone. As you can see, the probe in this study was a paper technology, but a lot of participants wondered whether this would be better or how it would be different if it were a smartphone-based technology. I'll talk more about this in a little bit. The next tension was easy versus hard. The question of ease of use and what that means in this context came up again and again. Part of asking people to engage with art and do this kind of reflection is really, by definition, to make them go out of their way. And so questions arise about how you can make it easy for them to do so without making it so easy that there's no value in the exercise. The next tension was now versus later, whether people should reflect on the artwork while they're in its presence, or if reflections later in the day or the next day are okay too. If it's okay to reflect on a photograph of the mural or only the mural itself, right? The next tension is top-down versus bottom-up. The probe invited participants to engage with murals throughout Philadelphia, and predictably, this led to questions of what is a mural, right? What counts as a mural? Does graffiti count? Do informal or independent murals count, or only those sponsored by Mural Arts, which is the predominant mural organization in Philadelphia? The next tension is private versus shared. Part of the meaning of an art experience is its privacy. And so the question is, how do you strike a balance between privacy and sharing in an app like this, or even in a more social context? The next tension, and the final one, is planned versus spontaneous. This is the question of going out of your way and planning to have art encounters versus when they surprise you and happen naturally, maybe as you're just going about your day or running an errand, and how these might be different and how reflection on them might be different. There's not time to talk through all of these, so again, I would direct you to the paper if you're interested in hearing more, but I did want to comment on just a couple. First, paper versus phone. So, as I mentioned, the question of digitizing the probe or something like it came up in nearly every interview. This was a paper probe, but people mused about whether it could be digitized and what that would mean. 2 of the participants decisively wanted the probe to be digital, and 2 actually decisively preferred it to be paper. Here's a quote from one participant. I felt a different sort of present in writing than typing. This participant actually used both typing and writing. It's a little bit different, and it's a little more permanent when I write on a piece of paper, then type and delete and go back and forth. I'll say I would definitely keep doing this, and I don't think I would if I was just writing on my phone. A key dimension of the preference of paper versus phone was ease for text entry, but this wasn't the only reason. Other reasons included that a digital version may allow for choice among questions, if a question, for example, wasn't relevant to this particular mural, or contextually generated questions, which could be really interesting. At the same time, a digital version would have had some drawbacks, such as visibility. Here's a quote from another participant. "Seeing the journal reminds me that I need to be paying attention to it. It's not my phone, because there's a million things I need to pay attention to on my phone." This participant, interestingly, associated the probe with unplugging and mindfulness, which she saw as actually opposed to digital technology. The next tension I want to discuss is the private versus shared one. Almost all the participants chose to use the probe on their own. One actually used it with friends and even on some dates. The participants' accounts suggest that meaningful experiences with the probe can be had in both cases, both individually and with others. But there's a deeper tension here that's actually more interesting about the communicability of art experiences in principle. All but one of the participants provided only textual answers, perhaps because the probe posed textual questions. But expressing an art experience in words may not always be possible, and this is a big tension for designers in this space. Here's a quote from one participant. "There's something private about an art experience, which is also why it's sometimes hard to write about. For me, sometimes it's not in words how this thing makes me feel. And then finding words almost ruins it sometimes." So that's an overview of the findings. Next, I want to move into a bit of discussion. First, to connect this back to moral learning, there was definitely some evidence of moral learning in these participants' accounts. This came from two sources. First, from the act of journaling itself. One participant, for example, found that when he was doing these reflections, he found himself more energized to do creative work, and he actually came to his own work, which wasn't necessarily creative, with a creative spirit. A second source was the content of the artwork. For example, one participant talked about reflecting on an upcoming marathon he was running by visiting a mural depicting athletes. To be sure, these are just small examples of moral learning. I go into a bit more detail about this in the paper, but overall, we'll need more research to look at how examples like this connect to bigger life changes and action, and how individual changes connect to societal and long-term changes. Given what proponents say about the scope and potential of public art as a public or societal form of art, this kind of research would be well worthwhile. Next, the findings in this study show that designers in this space must grapple with many difficult questions. For example, how can a design gracefully remind somebody about the value of art journaling while respecting the challenges in their lives, such as their difficult schedule? It might not be possible to resolve these tensions with design. Rather, they're features of the design space that simply must be navigated, not gotten rid of. I'll note here that ambiguity is a much discussed concept in the literature of design toolkits that might be brought to bear here. And moreover, designers in this space need to engage with self-critical questioning. We need to be open to the possibility that some things in life simply cannot, or maybe should not, be designed for with technological solutions, and art engagement, art experiences may just be one of them. To close, I wanted to reflect briefly on where this fits into the bigger picture. This work is part of a broad movement towards considering art as technological and technology as artful. At its best, I think, art is part of life, but too often today it is set apart from life. So I wanted to end with a quote from Michel Foucault on this topic. He says, "Art has become something that is related only to objects and not to individuals or to life. Art is something which is specialized or done by experts who are artists. But couldn't everyone's life become a work of art? Why should the lamp or the house be an art object, but not our life?" Thank you very much for listening. If you're interested, I invite you again to read the paper, where there's much more detail on everything I've said here. And if you have any comments or questions or ideas on where to take this work next, please do get in touch.